Hello everyone, Bendy Bono here for another foray into the Summa Theologica, starting the treatise on the angels today. But before we get into that, first things first, I apologize for the terrible video quality in the last episode. What happened was I upgraded my computer from Windows 8 to Windows 10. The program that I've been using for screen capture did not like that change, had major compatibility issues. It turned out to be kind of a nightmare to actually get it to do what I needed it to do. So I was even, for a while I thought I was going to have to record that episode all over completely, which maybe that would have been a better choice considering how poorly the video turned out. But by the time I started to kind of get to that conclusion, I'd already spent a very long time trying to fix it. So it just kind of is what it is. The good news is I have new video capture software that works much better and is quite a bit easier to use as well. So that should hopefully solve those problems going forward. But for those of you who suffered through question 49 in the last video, I do apologize for just how terrible that was, and it was pretty bad. Anyway, here we go. Treatise on the Angels. This is a 15 question treatise, so quite a bit longer than the last one, a little shorter than Treatise on the Triune God, but there's some very interesting stuff in here. So we've got 4 subsections: substance, intellect, will, and creation of the angels. And we start, of course, in substance. By the way, I've mentioned this a couple times, but when it comes to the Treatise on the Angels introduction, I bundled that introduction together with both the Treatise on Creation and Treatise on the Work of the 6 Days. So if you're wondering where the introduction for that is, just go back to right before question 44 in the videos or after question 43. So we start with, in this section on their substance, the substance of the angels absolutely considered or considered by itself. And then for the next few questions after this, we will consider the substance of the angels compared to corporeal things. There's some pretty interesting stuff in here. There's a couple of the objections that I'm going to punt on because I didn't really understand what he was saying. But for the most part, there's some pretty fascinating stuff here. So we start with, we got 5 articles, and we start with the question of, are angels altogether incorporeal? All right. So Damascene says that angels are incorporeal regarding us, but they are corporeal when compared to God. Corporeal, of course, I think we all understand by this point, means having a body. Aristotle says nothing is moved except a body, and Damascene talks about the angels being moved, being movable. And Ambrose says that every creature is limited, and to be limited belongs to bodies alone. Therefore, the angels are creatures, and they are therefore corporeal. But Psalm 103 talks about God making the angels as spirits or as being incorporeal. Okay, the argument is God desires that all creation be perfectly assimilated to himself. Part of God is his intellect. Therefore, the perfection of the universe requires, in order to perfectly assimilate as a whole to God, right? So when we talk about this up there, as we've talked about before, the idea isn't that every individual perfectly assimilates to God, but that creation as a whole reflects the image of God. Because of that, the universe requires purely intellectual creatures that are devoid of limitations, and we call those creatures the angels. Objections answered: incorporeal substances rank between God and corporeal creatures, so there's still that distinction, but it's incorrect to say that they're corporeal. Damascene refers to the movement of intelligence and will, where Aristotle, in that second objection, is referring to physical movement. And angels are not circumscribed by local limits, but they are circumscribed by limits of their essence. And we'll see a little more about that later on. Okay, number 2. Are angels composed of matter and form? So they're incorporeal, but because Aquinas is very, very thorough, we're also going to ask, are they immaterial? I would have thought those were one and the same, but not so fast, says St. Thomas Aquinas. So, 4 objections here. Angels are into the genus of substance. Everything in a substance is composed of matter and form. Or everything in a genus is composed of matter and form. Where the properties of matter exist, matter exists. The properties of matter, to receive and to substand, are found in angels, Form is act. If angels are only form, they are pure act, and that belongs to God alone. Form without matter is infinite. The form of an angel is not infinite, since every creature is finite. But Dionysius to the rescue. He's going to tell us that angels are immaterial. For angels to be material, matter would have to be divided between the corporeal and the spiritual, since a being cannot be both corporeal and spiritual. So there would have to be a division of matter. But matter is only divisible by quantity, and spiritual beings are not subject to quantity. Therefore, that division of matter, according to Aquinas, probably according to Aristotle, is impossible, and therefore every spiritual being is immaterial. Our objections answered. In corporeal things, there's a distinction between genus and difference. It's not the case in incorporeal things. That's one of these objections, like I said, that I just kind of have to punt on. I don't really fully understand what he's getting at there. Intelligible forms are not known by matter, but by the very nature of their form. In angels, there is still potentiality, since there is a difference between their existence and what they are, what is. And that goes back to what they're getting at there is, remember we talked about God, how his existence is his essence, and that's part of what makes him pure act. Well, that there's a distinction between existence and essence in the angels, and so because of that, there's still potency in them. And immaterial creatures are finite in their being. In other words, the angels aren't finite in the sense of having a body, but they are finite in the sense that they are their being and nothing else. Whether the angels exist in a great number, are there a lot of angels or just a couple? A number follows the division of a continuous body. This does not follow for the angels, since they are incorporeal. The closer a thing is to unity, the less it is divided. And the angels are closer to God, right? That's the hierarchy that Aquinas has set up. Corporeal beings, spiritual beings, God. Therefore, the least possible number of them exists. The effect of the angels is the movement of the heavenly bodies. These next two are going to be very, objections, by the way, are very... ones we, I think, as modern people, probably have a very difficult time getting our head around. If you're curious as to what exactly in the medieval mindset the relationship was between angels and the heavenly spheres, as they would have been thought about back then, I strongly would recommend C.S. Lewis's book, The Discarded Image, that gets into the medieval conception of the universe. It's a fascinating read. It's one that's helpful not only for moments like this that are going to pop up in Aquinas, but if you're reading, medieval literature like Dante, if you've read Paradiso, it's a huge, that's kind of like the whole idea of what he's getting at in there in terms of the construction of that he has of how Paradiso looks and acts and everything. So these two objections aren't going to make a great deal of sense to us, but for the medieval thinker, in terms of their conception of the universe, these would have been huge. So the effect of the angels is the movement of the heavenly bodies. These exist in small number. In other words, there aren't very many heavenly bodies, therefore there aren't very many angels. And the number of angels can only be according very similar to the number of heavenly bodies, since these are the end of the angels. So essentially, these two are coming out of a conception of the universe that directly ties the existence of angels to the existence of planets, stars, what the medieval mindset would have thought about as the spheres. Okay, so argument from authority, Daniel 7:10, and numerous other places in scriptures talk about there being 10,000 times 100,000 angels, which it's most likely supposed to be taken in terms of our interpretation of scripture. It's just a countless, unlimited number, or at least a very, very high number. There have been various opinions about the number of angels. However, sacred scripture teaches clearly that there's a vast number of angels. And the reason we can discern for this is that the angels are part of the perfection of the universe, and the more perfect some things are, the more of them God creates. So because angels are more perfect than corporeal beings, we would expect there to be even more of them than there are corporeal beings. All right, objections answered. In angels, number is not caused by division, but by distinction of forms. More on that in the next article. Since angels are closest to God, they must have the least composition, but that doesn't imply that they must be few in number, right? So as they approach unity, their complexity is going to diminish, but not the number of them. And then our two medieval objections. It is incorrect that immaterial substances exist because of corporeal ones, since their end, meaning the end of immaterial substances, is nobler. And as shown above, a distinction of matter is not the cause of the number of angels. So, even though Aquinas isn't necessarily objecting to the medieval conception of the universe, he's objecting to the conclusion that's drawn from it that would say that the existence of angels is directly dependent on the existence of heavenly bodies. So he would say that's incorrect. Right, number 4, angels differ in species. This is a very interesting one. But unfortunately, we start with an objection that I just flat out didn't understand, so I'm just going to read it and move on. Difference is nobler than genus. Since all angels agree in what is most noble in them, their intellect, they are different in species. Didn't understand that. The angels seem to differ according to more or less, which does not constitute a difference in species. Actually, this probably should have been they are not different in species. So I not only didn't understand it, I botched my summary of it. Souls and angels are related. Souls are all one species, therefore so are the angels. And the more perfect a thing is, the more it ought to be multiplied. This would not be so if every angel was its own species. Aristotle says that there is no first and second in things of one species, but Dionysius speaks of such an order in regards to the angels. Things that agree in species but differ in number are distinguished materially. We have already seen that angels are immaterial, and they differ in number. Therefore, they must differ in species. That's a really interesting idea, I find anyway, in terms of thinking about how we conceive of angels. That Aquinas is essentially saying every angel has to be its own species. It's probably a bit of a small potatoes thing in terms of the practical outworking of it, in terms of theology of angel, but I still kind of find it pretty fascinating to think about, actually. All right, objections answered again. Yeah, I didn't understand number 1, so let's just move on. Number 2, more or less can be applied between different species. It's when we say fire is more perfect than air. 3, the good of the species is better than the good of the individual, therefore it is better for a multitude of species to exist. Which is a good point. I didn't see how it tied to objection 3, but that's just me. And then the multiplication the multiplication of a perfect thing calls for a multitude of species, not several individuals of one species. Again, didn't fully get that, but it's an interesting idea. We'll move on. All right, number 5, finally for today, whether the angels are incorruptible. Damascene says the angels partake of immortality by favor, but not by their nature, making them naturally, I should have written, corruptible. Okay? So what's at stake here is, are angels by their nature incorruptible? Not in a moral sense, right? Because I assume that he's probably going to get into demons and all that at some point. We've already seen the existence of evil in some of the questions, but corruptible in the sense that, do angels die? Right? Plato makes references to corruptible gods, and we would understand those as angels, according to objection 2. And Gregory says that all things tend towards nothingness unless God preserves them. The angels are preserved as incorruptible by God's preservation, not by their own nature. Dionysius says that intellectual substances are incorruptible. Nothing is corrupted except by its form, being separated from matter. Since the angels are immaterial, they don't have a corruptible substance. How about that? And our objections answered. Damascene is referring to perfect immortality, which includes immutability and therefore belongs to God alone, so it doesn't really apply. Plato is referring to the heavenly bodies, not angels. We've already seen there's a little confusion on that point between the distinction of the two. Further clearing that up. And number 3, things are said to be corruptible not only when their existence is dependent on God's preservation, but when there is some natural corruption in them. form of true as of angels, the latter is not. What this is essentially saying is that, okay, fine, Gregory's absolutely right, that without God's preservation, any creature, including angels, would tend towards nothingness. It would cease to exist. But what Aquinas is saying here is fine, that's true, but when we use the word corruptible, we're kind of taking God's preservation as a given and saying, okay, given that, is said creature corruptible or incorruptible? And I said, well, the angels are still incorruptible by their nature, even though it's true that were God to withdraw his preservation of them, they would then become corruptible or would cease to exist. All right, so that's it on the substance of angels. Let's just take a quick sneak peek here at where we're going. So looking at the next few questions are a little bit shorter. I think 3 articles for each of them, and we'll look at angels in comparison to corporeal bodies. So hopefully be back in a couple days with those now that all the video issues are sorted out. Not only will we have better quality, but I will be able to get things out a bit faster than I have been, because I don't have to spend all that time dealing with video issues. Anyway, that's it for now. I'm Bendy Bono. I'll talk to you all later. Goodbye.